She thought she was fighting for her marriage, but she was actually walking into her own execution, or so she thought. Audrey sat at the mahogany table, her hands trembling as the woman sleeping with her husband raised a glass of vintage wine and called her worthless right to her face. Her husband, Preston, didn't defend her. He laughed. But they forgot one thing. They weren't the only ones at the table. Silas, the terrifying patriarch of the family, was watching, and when he finally put down his fork, the room went cold. What happened next wasn't just a breakup. It was total annihilation. You're not going to believe who actually owned the fortune they were fighting over. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It hammered against the windows of the black Mercedes S-Class like a judgment. Inside the leather-clad interior, the silence was louder than the storm. Audrey adjusted the hem of her dress, a modest navy blue silk that she'd worn 3 years ago, to a charity gala. It was the only formal dress that still fit her perfectly after the stress of the last year had whittled her frame down to sharp angles. Beside her, Preston drove with one hand on the wheel and the other scrolling through his phone, the blue light illuminating a face that had once looked at her with adoration, but now only held a permanent expression of mild annoyance. "Put the phone away, Preston," Audrey said, her voice soft but steady. "We're 5 minutes from your father's estate. If Silas sees you texting while driving through the gates, he'll have a fit." Preston didn't look up. He typed a quick reply, a smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth, before tossing the phone into the cup holder. "Relax, Audrey. The old man is turning 75. He's lucky I'm showing up at all, considering the quarter we just had. Bennett Logistics is carrying the family name right now, not him." "It's his birthday," Audrey reminded him, looking out at the iron gates of the Blackwood estate looming in the headlights, "and he respects punctuality and presence. You know that. I know what he respects. Money, power, results." Preston finally glanced at her, his eyes scanning her outfit with critical detachment. "Is that what you're wearing? I told you to buy something new, something sharp. You look like a librarian." Audrey felt the familiar sting of tears but swallowed them down. "It's a vintage Dior, Preston. And we're trying to save money, remember? You said the liquidity issues at the firm meant we had to cut back on personal spending." Preston let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "I said we need to be careful. I didn't say my wife should look like she shops at a consignment store. God, image is everything, Audrey. When are you going to get that through your head? Tonight isn't just a birthday dinner. It's a merger of sorts. We have guests." Audrey froze. "Guests? You said it was just family. Just Silas, you, and me." "Plans changed," Preston said dismissively as the car crunched over the gravel driveway. The massive stone manor looked like a fortress against the night sky. "Tiffany is coming." The air left Audrey's lungs. "Tiffany, your VP of sales. Why is she coming to your father's 75th birthday dinner?" Preston put the car in park and turned to her, his eyes cold and dead. "Because she's integral to the company's future, Audrey. She just closed the chaotic deal with the European distributors. She's valuable. She deserves a seat at the table." "Valuable?" The word hung in the air like a weapon. "She's your mistress, Preston," Audrey whispered, the truth she had been too afraid to speak for months, finally spilling out in the safety of the dark car. "Do you think I'm stupid? The late nights, the business trips to Aspen, the smell of her perfume on your coats. You're bringing your mistress to your father's house." Preston didn't panic. He didn't deny it. He just sighed, looking bored. "Don't start a scene, Audrey. You have a roof over your head, don't you? You have a car, a heavy allowance, and the Bennett name. Tiffany is a necessary partner. She understands the business. She understands me. Just go in there, smile, eat your soup, and don't embarrass me. If you make a scene, you'll be the one walking home in the rain." He opened his door and stepped out into the storm, not waiting to hold the umbrella for her. Audrey watched him walk toward the massive oak doors, her heart shattering in her chest. She had two choices: stay in the car and admit defeat, or walk in there and maintain her dignity. She took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped into the rain. She was a Bennett by marriage, but she had raised this man for 10 years. She wouldn't let him break her tonight. The foyer of the Blackwood estate smelled of old money, beeswax, cedar, and faint pipe tobacco. Silas Bennett stood by the roaring fireplace in the great hall. At 75, the founder of Bennett Logistics was still a mountain of a man. He leaned heavily on a cane topped with a silver wolf's head, his white hair slicked back, his eyes sharp as flint. Silas was a man of few words, and even fewer smiles. He had terrified Audrey when she first started dating Preston, but over the years they had developed a quiet, distant understanding. "Happy birthday, Silas," Audrey said, approaching him with a small, wrapped box. "I hope you're feeling well." Silas looked down at her, his expression unreadable. He took the gift, a first edition of The Art of War, a book she knew he had been hunting for years. He didn't open it, but his thumb brushed the spine. "You're late, Audrey." "The storm," Preston cut in, striding over to pour himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on the sideboard, and Audrey took forever to get ready. "You know how she is." Silas's eyes darted to his son, then back to Audrey's pale face. He said nothing. Just then, the heavy oak doors swung open again. The sound of high heels clicking on the marble floor echoed like gunshots. Tiffany entered. She was everything Audrey was not. Tall, statuesque, and wearing a dress that was entirely inappropriate for a family dinner. A bright crimson backless gown that clung to her like a second skin. She shook out a wet umbrella and handed it to the butler without looking at him. "So sorry I'm late," Tiffany announced, her voice projecting as if she were on a stage. She walked straight to Preston, placing a manicured hand intimately on his bicep before turning to Silas. "Mr. Bennett, an honor to finally meet the legend behind the empire. I'm Tiffany Vance." Silas didn't move. He looked at Tiffany's hand on his son's arm, then at the red dress, then at Audrey, who was standing perfectly still, her hands clasped white-knuckled in front of her. "I didn't realize we were hosting a cabaret," Silas rumbled, his voice gravelly. Tiffany laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Audrey's nerves. "Oh, you're hilarious. Preston told me you had a dry wit. I'm the VP of sales. I'm the one who brought in the McAllister account last week." "I know who you are," Silas said. He turned his back on her and walked towards the dining room. "Dinner is served. We do not wait." The dining room was a cavernous space, lit only by candles. The table was set for 4, but the dynamic was all wrong. Usually, Audrey sat to Silas's right and Preston to his left. But Tiffany breezed past Audrey and claimed the seat next to Preston, effectively blocking Audrey from her husband. Audrey was left to sit opposite them, alone on her side of the table, facing the firing squad. Silas sat at the head, heavily dropping into his chair. The staff began to pour the wine, a 1998 Chateau Margaux. "So," Tiffany started immediately, picking up her wine glass by the bowl rather than the stem, a subtle error that didn't escape Silas's notice. "Preston has told me so much about this place. It's a bit drafty, isn't it? If the company has another good year, maybe we could look into renovating this old hall. Modernize it. Glass walls, open concept." Audrey felt a surge of protectiveness. "The Blackwood estate is a historical landmark, Tiffany. You can't just knock down walls. It has history." Tiffany smirked, taking a sip of wine. "History is just another word for old, isn't it? In business, if you don't adapt, you die. Right, Preston?" Preston nodded, swirling his drink. "She's right, Dad. We need to stop clinging to the past. The company needs a fresh face. And frankly, so does this house." Silas cut into his steak, his knife scraping against the china. "The house stands because it has a strong foundation. Something you two seem to know little about." "Speaking of foundations," Tiffany pivoted, her eyes locking onto Audrey like a predator. Audrey, Preston tells me you used to be a graphic designer before you quit. I didn't quit, Audrey said, her voice shaking slightly. I stepped back to manage the household and support Preston when he took over as CEO. It was a joint decision. Right, Tiffany nodded with mock sympathy. Homemaker. It's a sweet gig if you can get it. Staying home, spending the money the men make. Must be nice to have so much free time while the rest of us are out there grinding, securing the future. I manage the estate's finances, the charitable trust, and the social calendar that secures our investors, Audrey corrected, finding her spine. It's not free time. Preston rolled his eyes. Barely work, Audrey. You sent a few emails. Tiffany just secured a $6 million contract. Let's have some perspective. The insult stung, but it was the public dismissal by her husband that hurt more. Audrey looked at Silas, hoping for some intervention, but the old man was focused entirely on his meal, seemingly deaf to the conversation. He was leaving her to the wolves. By the time the dessert course arrived, a dark chocolate tart with gold leaf, Preston and Tiffany had consumed the better part of 2 bottles of wine. Their knees were touching under the table. Audrey could see the tablecloth shifting. They were brazen, drunk on arrogance and red wine. Audrey had barely touched her food. She felt sick. She wanted to leave, but she refused to give Tiffany the satisfaction of seeing her run. I'd like to propose a toast, Tiffany announced, standing up. She swayed slightly, clutching her glass. To Preston, the man who actually runs the Bennett Empire, and to the future. A future where we trim the fat and focus on assets that actually provide a return on investment. She looked directly at Audrey. You know, Tiffany continued, her voice losing its sugary coating and becoming sharp, we were looking at the payroll and the expenses today, Audrey. Preston showed me the allowance you get for running this house. It's obscene. That is private matter, Audrey snapped. It's company money. Tiffany laughed. Technically, it's my commission you're spending on those vintage dresses. And for what? What do you actually bring to the table, Audrey? You have no kids. You have no career. You've aged out of being the trophy. You're just a line item, an expense. That's enough, Audrey said, standing up. Her hands were trembling violently now. Preston, are you going to let her speak to me like that in your father's house? Preston looked up, his face flushed. He didn't look angry at Tiffany. He looked annoyed at Audrey. She's not wrong, Audrey, Preston slurred. We've been talking. The business is evolving. My life is evolving. I need a partner who is a power player, not a dependent. Tiffany is a killer in the boardroom. You're just a passenger. A passenger? Audrey gasped. I designed the branding that launched your logistics app. I introduced you to the investors in the city council. I built the network you're standing on. That was 5 years ago, Tiffany shouted, slamming her hand on the table. What have you done lately besides spend Preston's money? You're worthless, Audrey. You're a leech. And frankly, this family dinner is for the people who actually matter to the Bennett legacy. You should just sign the papers Preston has in his car and leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Audrey looked at Preston. You have divorce papers in the car on your father's birthday? Preston shrugged, finally meeting her eyes with a cruel indifference. I wanted to get it over with. Tiffany and I are moving into the penthouse next week. It's time you faced reality, Audrey. Your expired goods. Audrey felt the room spin. The humiliation was total. She had been stripped bare, insulted, and discarded in front of her father-in-law. She turned to Silas, tears finally spilling over. I'm sorry, Silas, she whispered. I'm sorry I ruined your birthday. I'll go. She turned to leave. Sit down, Audrey. The voice didn't boom. It rumbled, low and dangerous, like the growl of a tectonic plate shifting before an earthquake. Silas Bennett had placed his silverware down on his plate with a deliberate clink. He hadn't looked up yet. He was wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, his movements slow and precise. Tiffany laughed nervously. Oh, Silas, don't worry. Let her go. The drama is exhausted. We can finally celebrate, I said. Silas looked up, and for the first time that night, his eyes were blazing with a cold blue fire that instantly silenced the room. Sit down. Preston sobered up instantly. He knew that look. That was the look Silas wore before he hostilely took over a competitor. That was the look of a predator who had finished playing with his food. Audrey froze, her hand on the back of her chair. She slowly sank back into her seat. Silas picked up his cane and slowly stood up. He loomed over the table, casting a long shadow over his son and the woman in the red dress. "You speak of value," Silas said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. He looked at Tiffany. "You speak of return on investment." He looked at Preston. "And you speak of ownership." Silas reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thick, 2D folded document and tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud between the candles. "It seems," Silas said, a cruel smile curling his lips, "that there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding who exactly owns what at this table." "Nein." Preston stared at the document. "Dad, what is that?" "That," Silas said, "is the restructuring agreement of Bennett Logistics, dated 5 years ago, the day you took over as CEO. I think it's time you read the fine print, Preston, because according to you, Audrey is worthless, but according to this document, she is the only reason you aren't in federal prison." The silence in the dining room was no longer just awkward. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air in a crypt before the door is sealed. The storm outside had intensified, thunder rattling the high, stained glass windows, but inside, the only sound was the rustle of paper as Preston picked up the document Silas had thrown. His hands were shaking so badly the paper vibrated. "Read it," Silas commanded, leaning back in his chair and tenting his fingers. "Page 4. Paragraph 3. The clause titled The Insolvency Contingency." Preston squinted at the legal text. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Dad, this is from the 2019 near bankruptcy. The McAvoy scandal. We settled this. I took the fall publicly. We paid the fines, and we moved on." "You didn't take the fall," Silas corrected, his voice dripping with disdain. "You almost destroyed a 50-year legacy because you were too busy partying in Ibiza to read the compliance reports. You committed gross negligence, Preston. You were legally liable for $40 million in damages. So, we paid it," Preston snapped, trying to regain his composure in front of Tiffany. "The company is profitable now. Why are we bringing up ancient history?" "Because," Silas said, his eyes narrowing, "we didn't have the liquidity to pay it. The banks were going to seize the assets. They were going to seize this house. We needed a guarantor. Someone with a spotless financial record and personal assets, inherited from a separate lineage to leverage a private bond. I couldn't do it because my assets were tied to the firm. Well, you couldn't do it because your credit was destroyed." Silas pointed a gnarled finger at Audrey. "She did it." Tiffany let out a scoff. "Her? What assets? She's a housewife." "Audrey's grandmother left her a trust," Silas said, looking at Tiffany with the annoyance one might show a buzzing fly. "A blind trust worth $12 million. She never touched a cent of it. She wanted to save it for your future children." Audrey looked down at her lap, remembering the day she signed the papers. She had done it out of love. She had leveraged her entire inheritance to bail Preston out of his own mess. "She liquidated the trust," Silas continued, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "She poured every penny into the company to satisfy the creditors. But there was a condition, Preston. A condition the board insisted on, and a condition I insisted on." "What condition?" Preston whispered, dread pooling in his stomach. "Read the paragraph," Silas barked. Preston cleared his throat, his voice cracking. "In exchange for the injection of capital, the controlling interest of Bennett Logistics comprising 51% of all voting shares and the deed to the Blackwood estate, shall be held in a proxy trust, the beneficiary of said trust. Preston stopped. He blinked, rereading the line as if the words would change. Go on, Silas urged. The beneficiary of said trust is Audrey Bennett. Preston dropped the paper. It fluttered onto his plate, landing in the remnants of the gravy. That's impossible, Preston stammered. I'm the CEO. I sign the checks. I make the decisions. You are a salaried employee, Silas said, taking a sip of his wine. You serve at the pleasure of the board, and the board is controlled by the majority shareholder. For the last 5 years, Audrey has signed off on every major decision you thought you made. That merger in Chicago, Audrey approved it. The new fleet acquisition, Audrey greenlit the budget. She has been the shadow director of this company for half a decade. Tiffany looked between them, her face paling beneath her heavy makeup. The realization was crashing over her. She hadn't been seducing the king of the empire. She had been sleeping with the court jester. You, Tiffany turned to Preston, her voice shrill. You told me you owned the company. You told me she was a charity case. I thought I did, Preston yelled, standing up and knocking his chair over. Dad, this is insanity. You let me run around thinking I was in charge. You let her play house while she actually owned my life. She didn't want to emasculate you, Silas said calmly. She wanted you to feel like a man, so you could grow into the role. She gave you dignity, Preston, something you clearly didn't deserve. Silas turned his gaze to Audrey. Audrey, my dear, your husband has just asked for a divorce. He has stated that his values no longer align with yours. As the majority shareholder, how do you feel about the current CEO's performance, specifically regarding his judgment in personnel? Audrey slowly lifted her head. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, hard clarity. She looked at Preston, the man she had loved, the man she had saved, the man who had called her worthless. I think, Audrey said, her voice steady and echoing in the large hall, that his performance has been lackluster. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The power dynamic, once tilted heavily towards the loud and the arrogant, now rested entirely with the quiet woman in the navy dress. This is a joke, Tiffany spat, grabbing her clutch. I don't care about your little family contracts. I have an employment contract, a severe severance package. If you think you can push me out, I'll sue this company for everything it's worth. I am the VP of sales, and I bring in the revenue. Audrey picked up her wine glass. She didn't drink. She just swirled the red liquid, watching the vortex. Tiffany, Audrey said. It was the first time she had addressed the mistress directly by name without fear. Do you remember the business trip to Aspen last month? The one where you secured the McAllister account? Tiffany narrowed her eyes. Yes, I closed the deal. Preston was there. I know, Audrey said. I approved the travel expenses, but I also noticed something interesting in the expense report. A charge for a client dinner at the Golden Stag. $4,000. So, it's a high-end client, Tiffany scoffed. The McAllister rep is a vegan, Audrey noted dryly, and a recovering alcoholic. Yet the bill listed 3 tomahawk steaks and 4 bottles of Dom Perignon. Audrey reached into her purse, the modest clutch Preston had mocked, and pulled out a folded receipt. I called the restaurant. They confirmed the table was for 2, a romantic candlelight dinner. Preston's face went grey. That's embezzlement, Tiffany, Audrey said, dropping the receipt on the table next to the divorce papers. Using corporate funds for personal leisure. That's a felony, and since it crosses state lines, it's federal. You can't prove that, Tiffany stammered, taking a step back. I can, Silas interjected, because I had the security team pull the restaurant footage. We have you and Preston toasting to fooling the old man. It's in 4K resolution. Very cinematic. Tiffany looked at Preston for help, but Preston was busy staring at the floor, realizing his entire life was disintegrating. So, Audrey continued, rising from her chair. She walked around the table, her heels clicking rhythmically. She stopped behind Preston. Here is how this is going to work. Tiffany, you're fired. Immediately. For cause. That means no severance. No unemployment. And if you attempt to sue, we will hand the evidence of embezzlement over to the district attorney. I imagine orange jumpsuits are less flattering than that red dress, Tiffany gasped. She looked at Silas, then at Preston. Preston, do something. Tell her she can't do this. Preston looked up, his eyes pleading. Audrey, please don't do this. Not in front of her. We can talk about this at home. Home? Audrey laughed, a dark, humorless sound. You don't have a home, Preston. You mentioned the penthouse, the one downtown. Yes, Preston said quickly. We can go there. I'll leave Tiffany, I swear. I made a mistake. The penthouse is a corporate asset, Audrey said. It's reserved for executive use, and since you're currently suspended, pending an investigation into your misuse of funds, you no longer have access to corporate housing. Suspended? Preston choked out. Silas, Audrey said, turning to her father-in-law. What is the protocol for an executive court embezzling? Immediate suspension without pay, Silas recited with a grim smile. Revocation of all company property. Vehicles, electronics, credit cards. Audrey turned back to her husband. She held out her hand. Keys, she said. Audrey. The keys to the Mercedes, Preston. And the black card. Now. Preston hesitated. He looked at the woman he had bullied for years, the woman he thought was weak. He saw no mercy in her eyes. Slowly, painfully, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the heavy key fob to the S-Class and his wallet. He placed them in Audrey's open palm. And the phone, she added. That's company property too. He handed it over. Audrey turned to Tiffany. I believe your car is a company lease as well. A Range Rover. Tiffany gripped her purse. I need a way to get home. There's a bus stop at the end of the driveway, Audrey said. It's a mile walk. I suggest you start walking. The rain is getting worse. Tiffany looked at the storm raging outside the window. She looked at Preston, who was slumped in his chair, defeated. You are pathetic, Tiffany hissed at Preston. You lied to me. You said you were the king. Get out, Silas roared, slamming his cane onto the floor. Tiffany flinched. She scrambled backward, grabbing her wet umbrella from the floor, and ran out of the dining room. The heavy front door slammed moments later, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. Now it was just the three of them. Preston sat with his head in his hands. He was stripped of his car, his phone, his job, his mistress, and his dignity. But he still had one card to play, or so he thought. Okay, Preston whispered. Okay, you win. You embarrassed me. You fired her. Are you happy, Audrey? Is this what you wanted? I never wanted this, Audrey said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I wanted a husband who respected me. I wanted a partner. I saved you, Preston. For 5 years I covered for you. When you missed meetings because you were hungover, I wrote the briefs. When you insulted the warehouse managers, I sent gift baskets and apologies to keep them from striking. I built the ladder you stood on to look down on me. I know, Preston said, looking up with tears in his eyes. He reached for her hand. I know, baby. And I'm sorry. I got lost. The power. It got to my head. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll change. I promise. Audrey looked at his hand, the hand that had held Tiffany's knee under the table 20 minutes ago. She didn't pull away. She just looked at it with curiosity, as if it belonged to a stranger. You asked for a divorce, Preston, she reminded him. You had the papers in the car. I was drunk. I was influenced by her, Preston pleaded. I don't want a divorce. We have a life together, and look, even if we did divorce, you know how messy it would be. Community property. I'd still get half the assets, half of your trust, since you commingled it with the company. Do you really want to destroy the company just to spite me? Let's be rational. It was a subtle threat. Even while begging, he couldn't help but try to leverage her. He thought he still had a financial claim. Silas let out a low chuckle. He began to cut another piece of steak. He really doesn't read, does he, Audrey? Audrey pulled her hand away from Preston. Do you remember the prenup, Preston? Yeah, Preston scoffed. My dad made us sign it, to protect the Bennett fortune from you. That was the original draft, Audrey said. But do you remember the amendment your father added the night before the wedding? The one you signed without reading because you were too busy planning the honeymoon? Preston froze. What amendment? The infidelity clause, Audrey said. It's a morality clause. Specifically, it states that if either party is found to be engaging in extramarital affairs that result in public embarrassment or financial loss to the family estate, that party forfeits all claims to marital assets. They leave the marriage with only what they brought into it. Preston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You brought nothing into this marriage, Preston, Silas added helpfully. You were fresh out of college with student debt that I paid off. You have zero equity. You have the evidence? Audrey said, gesturing to the surveillance footage Silas had mentioned. You have the witness, your own father. You have the confession at the dinner table. She picked up the divorce papers Preston had brought. She smoothed them out on the table. You wanted to sign these? Audrey asked. She reached into her purse and pulled out a fountain pen, a gift Preston had given her for their first anniversary, back when he was kind. She uncapped the pen. I'll sign them, Audrey said, but we are filing my version, the one where you walk away with nothing. Audrey, you can't, Preston gasped, panic seizing him. I have no money. I have no car. Where will I go? How will I live? You're a smart guy, Preston, Audrey said, signing her name with a flourish. You have a business degree. I'm sure you'll find an entry-level position somewhere. The job market is tough, though. You might want to update your resume. I'd avoid listing Bennett Logistics as a reference. She capped the pen and tossed the papers onto his chest. I'm keeping the house, she said. I'm keeping the company, and I'm keeping your father's respect. You can have the rest. Preston looked at Silas, begging for a lifeline. Dad, you can't let her do this. I'm your son. I'm your blood. Silas stood up, wiping his mouth. He walked over to Audrey and placed a hand on her shoulder. Blood makes you related, Preston, Silas said coldly. Loyalty makes you family. Audrey is the only Bennett at this table tonight. Silas looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It is now 9 p.m. The security gate locks automatically at 9:30. I suggest you start walking if you want to catch up with Tiffany. I imagine she's waiting at the bus stop. You're kicking me out, Preston whispered. In the rain? Happy birthday to me, Silas said. Get out of my house. Here is the final, climactic conclusion to the story, written to provide deep emotional closure and dramatic satisfaction, followed by the YouTube outro. The heavy oak door of the Blackwood estate clicked shut, sealing out the storm, the mistress, and the unfaithful husband. For a long moment, the only sound in the dining room was the ticking of the grandfather clock and the drumming of rain against the glass. The air felt different now, lighter, cleaner, as if a fever had finally broken. Silas Bennett, the man who was feared by Wall Street and revered by his competitors, let out a long, ragged breath. He looked older suddenly, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading to reveal the fatigue of a father who had just disowned his only son. He sank back into his chair, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the bottle of Chateau Margaux. He poured 2 glasses. He slid one across the mahogany table to the empty spot where Preston had sat, then realized his mistake. He paused, picked up the glass, and walked it over to Audrey. I never thought I'd see the day, Silas murmured, handing her the wine. I thought you were too soft, Audrey. I thought you were going to let him bleed us dry. Audrey took the glass. Her hand was steady now. The trembling had stopped the moment she signed the divorce papers. I loved him, Silas. You don't destroy the things you love until they leave you no choice. He left you no choice a long time ago, Silas grunted, clinking his glass against hers. To the new era. and to the only person in this house with a backbone. Audrey took a sip. It tasted like victory. "I need to be at the office at 7 a.m. tomorrow," she said, her voice shifting from personal grief to professional steel. "If Preston and Tiffany are locked out, the rumors will start by 8 a.m. The stock will wobble. I need to address the board before the market opens." Silas smiled, a genuine, rare expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's my girl. You take the Bentayga tomorrow. The S-Class is tainted." The takeover. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving Seattle washed clean and grey. The headquarters of Bennett Logistics, a glass monolith in the financial district, was buzzing with nervous energy. Preston hadn't shown up. Tiffany's office was locked. The company rumor mill was in overdrive. At 7:55 a.m., a polished silver Bentley pulled up to the curb. The valet, expecting Preston's aggressive arrival, was surprised to see the rear door open calmly. Audrey stepped out. She was not wearing the floral prints or soft cardigans she usually wore when dropping off lunch for Preston. She was wearing a tailored charcoal power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and heels that clicked with authority on the pavement. She wore no wedding ring. She walked through the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who had been brought to tears by Tiffany's bullying more than once, looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Bennett?" Sarah stammered. Is Preston coming in?" "No, Sarah," Audrey said, stopping at the desk. "Mr. Bennett is no longer with the company. Neither is Miss Vance. Please call security and have them box up the personal effects in the corner office and the sales VP office. Have them delivered to the storage unit on 4th Street. Nah." Sarah's jaw dropped. Who should I say is authorizing this?" Audrey smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The chairwoman." Audrey took the elevator to the top floor. She didn't go to the guest office she sometimes used. She walked straight into the CEO's suite. It smelled of Preston's cologne and stale ambition. She walked to the desk, picked up the framed photo of herself that Preston had kept face down for the last 6 months, and placed it in the trash. Then she hit the intercom. "Convening the board in 10 minutes, she said, "and get the legal team on the line. We have a forensic audit to conduct." The next 6 hours were a bloodbath, but a necessary one. Audrey didn't scream or shout. She laid out the spreadsheets. She showed the board the embezzlement, the falsified expense reports, and the reckless contracts Tiffany had signed to boost short-term numbers at the expense of long-term stability. By noon, the board, usually a group of skeptical old men, was eating out of her hand. They realized what Silas had known for years. Preston was the face, but Audrey was the brain. But the real test came at 2 p.m., the all-hands meeting. 200 employees gathered in the atrium. They were terrified. They knew a shake-up usually meant layoffs. Audrey stood on the mezzanine, a microphone in hand. She looked down at the sea of faces, people whose names she knew, whose kids' birthdays she remembered, people Preston referred to as overhead. "Good afternoon," Audrey's voice rang out, clear and amplified. "Most of you know me as Preston's wife. Today, I'm speaking to you as the majority shareholder of Bennett Logistics." A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. "There have been changes," she continued. "Preston Bennett and Tiffany Vance have been terminated for cause, effective immediately." Gasps echoed off the glass walls. "I know the rumors," Audrey said, cutting through the noise. "I know Tiffany told the sales team that layoffs were coming next month to boost the quarterly bonus pool for management. I am here to tell you that those layoffs are cancelled." The room went dead silent. "We are not cutting staff," Audrey declared. "We are cutting executive bloat. The salaries and bonuses previously allocated to the CEO and VP of sales will be redistributed into the operational budget. We are reinstating the 401k match that was paused last year, and we are going to fix the supply chain issues by listening to the warehouse managers, not ignoring them." For a second, no one moved. Then somewhere from the back, perhaps from the logistics coordinators who had suffered the most under Tiffany's reign, clapping started. It grew. It swelled until the entire atrium was erupting in applause. Audrey didn't smile. She just nodded. She had work to do. The fall of the prince. While Audrey was securing her empire, Preston Bennett was sitting in a plastic chair at the Department of Motor Vehicles. He was wet. He had walked 3 miles in the rain the previous night before finding a motel that would take cash, depleting the few $100s he had in his wallet. He had no car, no phone, and no credit cards. He needed a new ID to even access his personal bank account, an account he soon discovered had been frozen by a court order Audrey's lawyers had filed first thing in the morning, pending the embezzlement investigation. He looked around the DMV. He saw tired mothers, construction workers, students, people he used to look down on from the tinted windows of his Mercedes. Now, he was just number A45. He borrowed a phone from a teenager to call Tiffany. "The number you have reached is not in service," the automated voice said. Preston felt a cold pit in his stomach. Tiffany hadn't just been fired. She had run. She knew the audit was coming. She knew about the fake invoices. She had likely hopped the first flight to Cabo with whatever cash she had squirreled away, leaving Preston to face the music alone. "Number A45, the clerk shouted. Preston shuffled to the counter. I need an ID, and I need to know how to apply for legal aid." The clerk, a woman who looked like she had seen it all, chewed her gum and looked at his bespoke Italian suit, which was now wrinkled and mud-stained. "Fill out Form 104, she said, sliding a paper across the counter. "And, honey, you got a little something on your lapel?" Preston looked down. It was a smear of chocolate tart from the dinner. The worthless dinner. He tried to wipe it off, but it just smeared deeper into the fabric. 6 months later, the encounter. Seattle's business world moves fast, but memories are long. The narrative had shifted. Preston Bennett wasn't the young visionary anymore. He was a cautionary tale, a punchline in boardrooms. Audrey Bennett, however, was the Iron Lady of Logistics. Under her leadership, the company's stock was up 18%. She had streamlined operations, refurbished the fleet, and most importantly, restored integrity to the brand. It was the night of the Chamber of Commerce Gala, the biggest networking event of the year. Audrey hadn't planned on going, but Silas insisted. "You need to take a victory lap, Audrey. Wear something that costs more than Preston's life insurance policy." She wore emerald green, a velvet gown that draped off her shoulders, paired with vintage diamond earrings Silas had given her from his late wife's collection. She looked radiant, powerful, and untouchable. She was holding a glass of sparkling water, chatting with the mayor about zoning for a new distribution center, when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned. It was Preston, but not the Preston she knew. He had lost weight, and not in a healthy way. His hair was thinning. He was wearing a suit that didn't fit, clearly bought off the rack at a discount store. He was holding a drink that looked like whiskey. Neat. "Audrey," he said. His voice was raspier than she remembered. The mayor, sensing the tension, excused himself with a polite nod. "Hello, Preston," Audrey said coolly. She didn't offer her hand. "How are you?" "How am I?" Preston let out a bitter laugh. "I'm living in a studio apartment in Tacoma, Audrey. I'm driving a 10-year-old Honda. I'm working as a consultant for a trucking startup that doesn't even have a website yet. It's honest work," Audrey said. "It builds character." "Character?" Preston stepped closer, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and desperation. "You ruined me, Audrey. You took everything. My job, my home, my reputation. I can't get an interview in this town. Everyone knows I'm the guy who stole from his own father, the guy who got fired by his wife." "You did that to yourself," Audrey corrected him, her voice low so as not to cause a scene. "I just signed the paperwork." "I made a mistake," Preston hissed. Okay, I cheated. Men cheat, Audrey. It happens. But did I deserve this? Did I deserve to be destitute? I helped build that company too. You almost bankrupted that company. Twice, Audrey said. And as for men cheat, real men respect their partners. You didn't just cheat, Preston. You humiliated me. You brought your mistress to your father's birthday table and called me worthless to my face. You tried to discard me like trash. She took a step closer to him, her emerald dress catching the light. You asked me what I brought to the table, she whispered. I brought the table, Preston. And now I've taken it back. Preston stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. He looked like he wanted to scream, to hit something, to cry. But he knew he was powerless here. He was surrounded by people who respected Audrey, people who would have security throw him out in a heartbeat. I miss you, he said suddenly, his voice cracking. It was a last-ditch effort, a manipulation born of despair. I miss us. The money. I don't care about the money. I miss my wife. Audrey looked at him with a profound sense of pity. She realized then that she didn't hate him anymore. Hate requires energy. She felt nothing. He was just a stranger with a familiar face. Your wife died that night in the car, Preston, Audrey said softly. The woman standing in front of you is the CEO of Bennett Logistics, and she has a very busy schedule. She turned around, presenting her back to him. Goodbye, Preston. She walked away, merging into the crowd of admirers and colleagues. She didn't look back to see security gently escorting a weeping man in an ill-fitting suit toward the exit. Later that night, Audrey returned to the Blackwood estate. The house was warm and lit up. Silas was waiting in the library by the fire. How was the gala? Silas asked, looking up from his book. Eventful, Audrey said, taking off her earrings and placing them on the side table. I saw Preston. Silas snorted. Did he ask for money? He asked for forgiveness, Audrey said. I think he's finally realized that Tiffany wasn't the prize. Speaking of Tiffany, Silas said, closing his book, I got a call from the district attorney today. They found her. Audrey paused. Where? She was trying to cross the border back into the country from Mexico. Apparently she ran out of money. She tried to use a company credit card to buy a plane ticket. Silas chuckled darkly. The flag on the account alerted the authorities immediately. She's in custody, Audrey. The embezzlement charges are sticking. She's looking at 3 to 5 years. Audrey looked into the fire. She thought about the woman in the red dress, the arrogance, the cruelty. She thought about the worthless comment. Do you want to press for the maximum sentence? Silas asked. The lawyers say it's up to us how hard we push. Audrey watched the flames dance. She thought about the mercy she had shown Preston by not sending him to jail, only to poverty. She thought about Tiffany, who had actively conspired to steal from the family. No, Audrey said. Silas looked surprised. No, we don't need to push, Audrey said, turning to her father-in-law with a calm smile. Let the law do its job. I don't need revenge, Silas. I'm already living well. That's the best revenge, isn't it? Silas studied her for a moment, then nodded with pride. You're a better person than I am, Audrey. A true Bennett. No, Audrey said, picking up her photo from the mantel. A new one, taken of her and Silas at the company picnic, both laughing. I'm an Audrey, and that's worth a lot more. She kissed the old man on the cheek and headed up the grand staircase. She had an early meeting tomorrow. She was acquiring a competitor, the very trucking startup Preston was consulting for. She wondered, briefly, if she should fire him when she took over. She smiled. No, she thought. I'll keep him on. In the mailroom, everyone has to start somewhere. The lights of the Blackwood estate shone bright into the night, a fortress no longer under siege, but ruled by a queen who knew exactly what she was worth. Wow. Just wow. Can you believe the audacity of Preston and Tiffany? They really thought they could just erase Audrey from the picture, not realizing she was the one holding the frame the entire time. I have to ask you guys a question, and I want you to be honest in the comments below. Did Audrey go too far? Some people might say stripping Preston of everything and leaving him to work in a mailroom was cruel. Others, like me, think it was pure poetic justice. He messed around and found out, right? And what about Tiffany getting arrested at the border? Karma really doesn't miss. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate girl boss redemption, please do me a huge favor. 1. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells YouTube you want more stories like this. 2. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our upload. We drop new drama stories every Tuesday and Friday. 3. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder to never let anyone call them worthless. Thanks for watching. And remember, be careful who you step on trying to climb the ladder. They might just own the ladder. See you in the next one.